folks, if you missed the Kickstarter and want to pre-order Flea Mortals, the MCDM monster book, pre-orders are open. We also have a channel in our Discord for talking about the monsters we've released so far, and there are more monsters coming soon. Link in the doobly-doo. On with the show. This is one of those videos that has a couple of lessons in it. I think you could basically use this video to run your own Dusk adventure, but I couldn't figure out how to turn each of these lessons into their own videos, so there's a bunch of advice in here. That usually means fewer people watch it, which, that makes me sad because I put a lot of work into this stuff. But I see it as my role to teach what I've learned, and if some lessons are complex and they don't boil down easily into a video with a clear thesis and a clever title, I know some people will still get use out of it. Anyway, you get it. I think the first part of this video could have been called Too Many Villagers, Herr Mozart.
How shall one say, Director?
Too many notes, Your Majesty.
Exactly. Very well put. Too many notes.
So if you don't know what Dusk is, it's a campaign I ran last year for my friends. You can watch the whole thing right here on this channel, playlist here. The idea was very simple and straightforward, and that was the power of it. Step 1, find the missing villagers, a whole town full of them. They are in the forest somewhere. They live up in the north, and there's a lot of strife up there, so they decided to brave the elf-haunted forest to the south and make for literally greener pastures. There used to be a road through the forest, so the villagers think, how hard can it be? That's the setup. Find the missing caravan. And originally I thought that would be the whole thing. I didn't think it was a campaign. I just wanted to show off 4th edition. 4E was a lot of fun. It had a ton of cool features. It was a very forward-looking product, and the players loved it. A couple of them asked, can we just run the Chain of Acheron in 4E? Well, I don't know. No, not right now, but maybe later, like after the heist. We'll see. So for the entire first part of the campaign, there were no villagers to worry about. I figured the game would end when they found the missing villagers. This was just a demo, an excuse to throw a bunch of fun encounters at the players, which meant it was also very easy to prep. Mostly what I did was scrub through a few fantasy map Patreons, links in the doobly-doo, and when I saw a map that inspired me, well, that was the next encounter. That process, find a cool enchanted forest map, build an encounter for it, was easy and fun for me. I could prep an entire session in just a couple of hours before we played, which, compared to the Chain of Acheron, was like paradise. One thing I did, which I don't think would have worked anywhere near as well if we were playing in person, was one session I just put a gigantic tactical map in front of them. I dropped them on the edge of this huge forest map, and I said, okay, go ahead. We were using Fantasy Grounds, which has dynamic lighting, and I dropped a bunch of encounters around. It was really cool. It was night, and Odie's character doesn't have dark vision, so when the player with the light walked away, Matt was literally plunged into darkness. His entire map turned totally black with just his icon there floating in space, and you could hear him yell. This was awesome, and letting them literally just walk around on the map and explore on their own, go in different directions, until eventually one or two of them ran into a threat, was something I don't even know how I would do at the table. So that's a little something. If you're using a VTT, feel free to rip this idea off. Find a really big map that is suited to whatever wilderness your players are exploring, drop a bunch of encounters in, and just sit back and see where they go. Might be even cooler to do this with a big dungeon. Eventually, they find the caravan, and I think, okay, mission complete, good job, adventure over. But the players indicated, no surprise, that they wanted to keep playing, and I thought, okay, seemed like an obvious next step was escort the villagers safely out of the forest. I basically imagined this adventure as a kind of Heart of Darkness, Apocalypse Now adventure, where instead of a jungle, it's a forest. But otherwise, it is very episodic. They have no idea what's going to happen next. And because it is a WOD, I could play around with time and alternate realities, and that gave me a very broad palette to paint with. Lots of cool encounters, straightforward encounters, along with high weirdness and mysteries and foreshadowing. I could run this adventure 10 times and I would never get bored because I'd always have new ideas for what crazy stuff might happen in this forest. However, and here we come to the lesson, I knew the villagers would work as a kind of hit points for the adventure. When they left the village, there were 40 of them, but by the time the heroes find them, there's only 28. And the question was, how many will we lose trying to get out of here? Now, that wasn't the problem. That was a good idea, and it worked well. With that many villagers, I could create scenarios where I knew some might die, but it didn't mean total failure. Using the villagers as a kind of adventure hit points worked. The problem wasn't the number of villagers. It was my ridiculous idea to try to make each of them individuals and develop all their relationships. Like, I knew there were 3 generations of families represented, so I had each family tree mapped out. They were all named, they all got unique art and fantasy grounds, and I imagined that a lot of complex behavior would arise out of this, that the villagers would feel real, like real people, that they would argue about what to do, about who to trust. Now, in the end, I don't think the players could even have named more than maybe 2 villagers. And that includes Anne Polly, who became sort of the only villager they cared about. But that's not because the players weren't engaged. They were super engaged. It was because of my decision to try to present all the villagers equally. And it wasn't like I did that and the players were overloaded. No, I was overloaded. I bit off so much I couldn't even swallow it. That analogy turned out different than I imagined. Anyway, I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep all the villagers and their personalities and motivations in my head at once, and it was stupid to try. If this were a game I was designing for other people to play without me, I would never have made that mistake. But as a DM, I get these grandiose ideas and I think I can do anything. Nope. What I should have done was had like 3, maybe 5, but certainly no more than 5 villagers who represented all the others, and they could each have a point of view, and they could disagree and come into conflict, and the players would get to know them. The reason the players focused on Anne Polly was because she was cute and simple. Protect the kid. But if I had picked 5 villagers and focused exclusively on them, I am 90% certain the players would have had a more memorable and meaningful experience dealing with them. 5 is a good number because I can create conflicts or explore themes using different combinations of characters without overloading one character. You know, it would be kind of unbelievable if every time there was an issue, it was always between these 3 people. With only 3, every issue turns into the reasonable one, the unreasonable one, and the one in the middle. But 5 gives me a lot more subtlety. And with 5 named important villagers, I could lose 1 or 2, including through self-sacrifice, and I would still have a few left. There's so much I could have done. Themes about relying on the heroes instead of themselves, about being inspired by the Dragon Knight, but also sort of blaming all this on them. If the Dragon Phalanx had stayed true, good King Omen would still be alive and none of this would have happened. Themes about generations and parents and children, and about being afraid of the future, about selfishness and sacrifice. We touched on some of that, but not much. So that's another lesson. If I were to do this over again, or if you were to do it, an adventure like this is easy. I would still have dozens of villagers, and I'd probably come up with names for all of them just in case, but the only ones who would talk would be the core 5, and I would only need keywords to describe them: fearful, brave, cynical, talkative, etc. Each would get a couple of these keywords. No one is only one thing. Easy. That would have been easy. But another lesson that came out of this was the fact that almost against their will, the players did not want the villagers to die. Even though I failed to present them as characters they could engage with, they still eventually really behaved like these people mattered to their characters, if not the players. And this is tricky. I get a lot of questions about this stuff in chat on Twitch where folks ask, how can I get my players to care? And we've got more than a few videos here that cover that. But one of the problems I think folks don't realize is that new players, and here I mean players new to the hobby, do not arrive at the table ready and willing to care about NPCs. They arrive at the table ready and willing to play D&D, which mostly means fighting monsters. And there isn't a lot you can do about that except play a lot. Eventually, and I think this can literally take dozens of sessions, fighting monsters ceases to be this novel experience, and the players start discovering all this nuance and drama and potential in the game. So you watch videos of experienced DMs online and you think, oh, I can do that. Well, I know you can do it. But you have to ask yourself, is this what my players want? Are they perfectly happy just killing monsters? Maybe that's why they ignore all the lore and the NPCs you made. So these players in Dusk are ready to care about the villagers, even though I didn't do a great job at giving them good reasons to, and some really interesting behavior emerged. Because since they cared about the villagers, suddenly I had encounters where none of the heroes' lives were at stake. Like at one point, pretty early after finding the lost caravan, the heroes realize they have to stop. The villagers are trying to bring basically their entire town with them on carts, and it's just slowing them down too much. So the heroes have to convince them to leave some stuff behind. This is an encounter I designed on purpose. I invented the idea that the villagers were carrying too much and it slowed them down and that they'd never make it out of this forest at the rate they were traveling. I wanted to create a scenario where the players had to deal with the villagers. Some of the villagers don't want to leave their stuff behind. Some of the villagers resent having to take orders from basically a bunch of aliens. And that becomes the challenge. No combat, no initiative, just people being people. In this scenario, no one's life was at stake, but the players still engaged. They were frustrated at first that the villagers didn't just automatically do whatever the players told them to do. That happens all the time. Players tend to treat NPCs like video game NPCs and not like real people. But honestly, in this case, that's because I was putting complex tensions in front of them, But they didn't know any of these people well enough to imagine them complexly, because I was trying to make them all complex and failing, so none of them seemed complex. Once the players took the problem seriously, though, they really engaged with it. It was very cool seeing their solutions. So that was one challenge where there were no monsters, no one called initiative, just people being people. It reminds me of a fun moment in the Castle Rend campaign where Nicodemus, who is a newly minted count, has a small village that is coalesced around his ruined keep. These people are basically volunteer peasant labor, and one of the workers, a kid, is accused of stealing from another worker. Now, this is not a city with cops and judges and jails. It's just a ruined keep in the middle of the forest. And Nicodemus has to figure out, what do I do? What is the right thing to do? What is the practical thing to do? If I do the wrong thing, how will the other peasants react? What if what I think is right just pisses these people off? I need them to help me rebuild this keep. They look to me for protection and leadership. If I screw this up, they might all drop their hammers and go home. I think sometimes folks make the mistake of imagining that in order to get the players to care about stuff besides their own skins, they need to like the NPCs. They need to actually care about them as people. But I think that makes this a harder problem than it needs to be. The players in Dusk didn't like the villagers, with one exception. Nicodemus didn't even know who these people were. I hadn't spent much time establishing them as individuals. But in both cases, the people were the point. Like them or not, Nicodemus needed them. Like them or not, Woderhead was responsible for getting these people to safety. So liking the NPCs is by no means the most important issue. One of the coolest moments in Dusk, and this is saying something as each session was super memorable, was when a griffin, looking to find food for its newly hatched chicks, decided one of these old villagers wouldn't be missed. Just a random old lady. Maybe she had some dialogue earlier in the campaign, maybe some of the players remembered her name, but I don't think it would have mattered either way. This was definitely a life or death scenario, but it wasn't the heroes' lives on the line. A griffin is no big deal for them. The challenge was stopping the griffin from flying away with a delicious villager, or recovering her if the griffin managed to whisk her away. And the amazing thing about this is, because the heroes weren't in jeopardy, that meant they could be brave. Really brave. Brave in a way you don't normally get when it's literally just us versus them. All PCs on one side, all monsters on the other. Because Zoga Borhart's solution to this was push the old woman down and stand over her. So the griffin would and did grab Zoga instead. That kind of self-sacrifice, it just wouldn't have happened otherwise. You can't push a hero down and stand over them. Then you're down one hero. This is a huge lesson for me. The hero's bravery is measured in what they are willing to risk to save the people. Another lesson, which is to say another thing I failed to do, was design encounters to give each player a chance to shine. Some players got those moments, but only a couple, and in every instance it was because it emerged dynamically from the narrative. I didn't really plan it. For instance, Zoga Borhart, excellent character played by my friend Tom Schmuck. He's a tactician and a leader. I mean, he is literally a warlord. That's his class. And warlords are leaders with a capital L in 4E. So what I should have done was create at least one encounter with a neutral tribe of whatever in this giant forest and make negotiating with them the point. And that would give Zoga a chance to shine. Now, this is something I think I'm actually pretty good at. So why didn't I do it? Well, mostly I think I was just in love with the find a cool map, toss some monsters on it process. If you were going to run something like Dusk, the whole point of it being episodic, meaning each session presents some challenge to overcome, which has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and is unrelated to the next challenge, is that you can do whatever you want in a given session. I bet you already have ideas of what kind of diplomacy challenge I could have put in front of the heroes. So these are a few lessons broadly applicable to most DMs, but also I think there's enough in this video to get you started if you want to run your own Dusk-style adventure. Thanks for watching, folks. If you like this video and want to get an alert when we upload something new, click the bell icon below. If you want to get a dope shirt or a cool mini, come by our store. Next video, I don't know, but I think it might be about lore, and I think you're going to like it. Until next time, peace out.